so cool. You should get it. Work around and someone will get
over a little bit.
E-L-L-E-R.
And here you are. Guatemala. I'm sitting around. I guess he's lawyering.
Pretty active. The guys down in the Cape that hold it together all world. They're all in their 60s, retired.
Oh, yeah.
So they just carry the ball because they got time.
But they got the vet centers down there too, right?
The what?
They got a vet center down there.
Yeah, they got non-vet center. Yeah, but that's sort of a different realm. You know, there's some going back and forth to people. But mostly we're by ourselves and they accept us and we accept them. You know, if you go to a parade, we usually end up marching right behind them. So it's good.
To Cleveland, yeah. So I've been there, and now I work a lot with, I'm working like with nature work with all these survivors of this plane crash, the one that just crashed, with the icing thing. So that's most of my work, car accidents. So I'm writing a book on car accidents. So, I mean, you never know where this stuff is going to take you.
Your background is in psychology?
The only reason I ever got into this was because of VVAW. I was in the first rap groups here in New York. Several of the guys, Pear, and several guys were in the rap groups. Bob Woodton and High That started the whole vet center. That's where the vet center program came from.
That's how we started VVAW in Kansas City. Really was because we used that rap group guideline sheet or something you guys had put out, and we started.
Listen, you know, I got a book that's decidedly anti-war in nature that's published. Johnny's got he's got copies and selling it. It's actually a book of poetry and photographs of the young men in the war, in the war environment. And I think, yeah.
Is it your book?
My book, yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm an author. That's what I do.
Fantastic. Oh, I'd love to get a copy. Can I
really,
buy a copy from you?
Absolutely. You can buy it from Johnny, and I'll sign it. The thing is, if you can interest the vet centers and people working with vets in terms of psychological problems, I think this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is to appeal to that compassionate side of the soldiers. See, so many of the Vietnam literature in the past have not really dealt with the compassionate side of the young men. I mean, they forgot about Johnny, you know? They forgot about Danny, you know, from such and such a high school and everything. Well, that's what I write about. And in fact, I have a novel coming out in about 3 weeks that deals with two homeless Vietnam veterans living in the streets of Baltimore, and they arrive at a spiritual renaissance. You know, they actually overcome their problems. And this is the kind of thing I address as a writer. And and that's coming out nationally as well. And I write for
Great. You're the only person I've ever met that said, I'm going to keep it straight. Everyone else has got a weird.
You guys like to immortalize yourselves? What we're doing is we're taking a record of the event and just asking different people what their impressions are. What's your name, sir?
Tim Teeter.
Tim Teeter. And what brings you here today, Tim?
Just for the reunion, just for the remembrance of all the friends that I've had over the years.
And when did you first become acquainted with VVAW, Tim?
I guess it was probably about 1970, after I got back from overseas.
And when were you in country?
From 1966 off and on through 1969.
What branch of the military were you in? What unit?
11th Marines.
artillery unit.
Yeah, I was in the headquarters battalion.
Headquarters battalion. And what made you become attracted to an organization like VVAW?
Well, originally it was mental health.
Mental health, okay.
It was kind of like the only thing that really kept me and a whole lot of folks going before the Veterans Administration even remotely recognized post-traumatic stress disorder.
So you went to the first rap groups in New York?
Well, I'm from, I lived in Florida at the time.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, we didn't really have anything that formal. Mostly we just got together and just kind of, mutually supported each other.
Uh-huh. So in a way, VVAW was fulfilling the role that the Veterans Administration just wasn't doing at the time?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It fulfilled two roles. It fulfilled the role of mental survival, if you want to call it that, and it also filled the role of political activity that a lot of us either came away from the country thinking about wanting to be involved with, or gravitated towards that after we got home and got a real good understanding of what was really going on.
Yeah, well, some guys always talk about how political activity was sort of part of their therapy, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's a completely valid statement. It was. And it really remains part of the therapy today. I mean, a lot of guys are still having problems with the war, but then I think a lot more folks, men and women, are having problems with what our government's doing. And so being able to be active politically and being able to stand up and say no is real good for everyone's mental health.
Right. Well, being a member of VVAW, you might have had to read on the events of the past 10 years. That is, with the formation of VVA and other organizations like that. How do you think VVAW had a role in creating all this?
Honestly, I don't know.
Because Mueller had been in VVAW.
Yeah. Well, I have to confess a lot of ignorance on the internal politics of the veterans movement for the most part.
Well, probably to your benefit.
Well, yeah. After about 1970, I just kind of moved into other areas.
Right.
Of interest.
Your brother's here from VVAW.
Well, it's positive in one aspect that it's wonderful to be with folks again and to keep in touch as we get fat and old and gray and bald. And then in the other sense, it's really depressing. It's depressing that we're still doing this stuff. It's depressing that we still need to do this stuff. It's really depressing that we can't point to ourselves and say, hey, we were the last ones. But since then, we've had Grenada and we've had the Mideast, and oh man, it's like endless enemies and endless wars, and it goes on and on and on. So all of us are here to say that, hey, we've been there, and there's a lot better ways to settle problems and deal with the world situation.
Well, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah,
have a good day.
A lot of places VVA was last.
Would you be correct to call it a purification ritual?
No, call it a blessing.
Blessing? What tribe are you from?
Caddo, C-A-D-D-O. Caddo. That's right, nation.
Caddo Nation of Oklahoma?
That's exactly it.
Okay, and Nation. When did you were in Vietnam, right?
68 and 69.
Okay. I'm gonna just. And do you want to have anything you want to say in terms of your involvement in the Native American movement in New York City?
I guess I will.
No. Oh, you're gonna say something.
I'm gonna say something.
Okay, so I don't need to say nothing about. I don't need to. I'm just gonna introduce you as a member.
Right. No, you don't.
Give a blessing, a member of the Caddo Nation, an activist of the Indian Native American movement, and served in Vietnam.
I was, yeah, right.
You have anything else you want me to say?
Why don't you go ahead and say that my wife and I do a lot of storytelling in schools, and we pass on our traditions in that way while we're here.
I mean, that's okay. Looking good, man. You look different without a mustache, though.
Oh, you're right. I probably
You do. At first I said, yeah, because you had that big bushy stash.
doesn't make sense. I decided to get rid of it.
And if elected, I promise.
Well, then in that case, why don't I move this down so you can get a foot on it? Oh, okay.
Well, no, it's got to be for you and for me.
What do we want, Corey? What do we want? When do we want it?
Wait, say that again?
What do we want? What do we want? Sorry about that.
I like that You get the U.S. Indochina position? Is that?
Yeah, no, not for me. I'm World War II Korean. The oldest guy gets the happiest one.
See Mrs. Fitch over there?
Yeah, I'm going to try to.
Oh, my dude.
My
Greg.
dude.
Yeah.
Speaking with.
You're
I'm going to try.
right?
Yeah.
I've heard so much
I'm going to
about
try.
you.
Greg. You with boyfriends this week?
This is Greg Payton?
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
him very well.
yeah.
I'm going to try to run across Mr. Trump. Real heroes of the world.
Give me some pictures. All right, this is nice. I'm glad you came. You know, I wanted to meet you when I went to Chicago for the 20th anniversary, because I knew your name. You know, I'd heard about the work you did when you were in VA. I mean, I saw that TV show, but I knew about you before that, you know? So I'm glad to meet you. For me, it's an honor.
Oh, it's an honor.
So, what's the Honduras story?
We just discovered this is the Honduran flag. I was Panama earlier, but we got it. I mean, it was really hard to really know, you know. But
Do you know anything about Honduras? Why maybe you could just tell me
it's part of the, the world revolt and revolutions and fighting the systems, and something that we've been all about for a long time. Since 1967. I was in Vietnam, not in Honduras.
Probably Marine invasion. U.S. Marine invasion.
Long ago.
Yeah, well...
Well, the Marines have invaded everywhere sometime or other. You know.
So what do all you guys with the flag do? What's your role?
Well, we're probably trying to pretty well portray our involvement in as policemen of the world. When I was in Southeast Asia, I was always astounded by how much of fleets we had in Japan, the Philippines, and Hong Kong, and Vietnam, and Gulf of Tonkin. And it's overwhelming the amount of power we have in the world. And just too much. And just sick of being policemen to the world. Sheldon Ramsdale, founding member of VVAW.
To remember the dead, to mourn the dead, to honor the dead, and to reaffirm our commitment to fight for the living. 25 years ago, Vietnam Veterans Against the War was founded. It's 17 years since the Vietnam War ended. Yet we still have thousands of Vietnam veterans suffering from that war. Our true MIAs, those brothers still missing in America, wander the streets homeless. New York City today, 1/3 of the homeless males are Vietnam veterans. More veterans have died from suicides and drug overdoses than died in the war. 58,000 names are on the wall in Washington, but more have died from Agent Orange, from cancer from Agent Orange, from AIDS, from drugs, and other conditions than died in Vietnam. Many more still suffer from post-traumatic stress and the related problems of substance abuse. Today, thousands are underemployed and unemployed while others languish in prison. Veterans of America are still being denied justice by the government that sent us to fight that war 20 years ago. Meanwhile, the victims of other countries who were subject to American wars still are being punished. 17 years after the end of the Vietnam War, our government still refuses to have normal relations and reconciliation with the people and governments of Indochina. Our government refuses to end the trade embargo against Vietnam or normalize relations, while we find ourselves in the unusual position of supporting the murderous Khmer Rouge in Cambodia against a government that is trying to bring peace to that land. Instead of coming to terms with our own past, our government continues to pile up the bodies. You know, Santa Anna once said, those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. And if we take a look at 1992, we find ourselves once again going full cycle. In 1968, 1969, we came home from the war to the war at home. In 1992, troops came home from the war in the Persian Gulf to the war in Los Angeles. Unemployment continues to rise in America. Racial violence, denial of women's and workers' rights. And now we have troops in the streets of America. Bush's answer to the social problems of America. We're going through the same cycle all over again. This is an old story to us. So when we're here today, 25 years later, this is not a reunion. This has to be a recommitment to the fight that we started 25 years ago. We have to ask, are we going to just come back and tell old war stories or old peace stories? Or are we going to make a decision to continue this fight for social justice at home and against war abroad? The question has to be asked, who is next on the Bush hit list? Is it Cuba? Is it one of the countries in South America? Is it the Philippines? Is it Iraq again? Or maybe it's going to be Japan this time. Our list of enemies continues to grow. Though the Cold War ended, we find ourselves surrounded by more enemies today than we ever have. And the enemies are in the streets of this country if we were to listen to our president. They're even on TV with Murphy Brown. We say that we have to recommit ourselves, that we have to honor the dead and mourn the dead, but in doing that, it's to recommit ourselves to the fight for the living. Fight for justice, for economic and social justice for all people in this country and throughout the world. That's what VVAW is about, and that's what we're about today. I'd like to begin this memorial service by introducing a member of New York City Vietnam Vets Against the War and a member of the Caddo Native American Nation of Oklahoma, who will be providing us with a blessing. He served in Vietnam in 1968, and he and his wife Donna do storytelling at New York City high schools to pass on the tradition of the Native American people. I'd like to give you Joe and Donna Cross.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I guess we'd just like, before we pray and do our blessing here, I'd like to show you the staff that I made for the memorial today. It's just made out of mulberry stick here, and I have a spent shell casing of an M16. I have 3 hawk feathers on there, and they are ruffled feathers, which represent a lot of things, but they represent members of Native Americans and all Americans that have been in wars, and there are 3 feathers, which is 1 less than usually we use groups of 4, and that would symbolize that we are missing some of our warriors, either MIAs or in death. And I'm from Oklahoma, and I have a cousin who is an MIA and never came back, and often I speak with his mother, my aunt, and she too thinks it's kind of bad that we have to drag this MIA thing on and doesn't really see any purpose in it. She even gave me permission to say that to you. I'd like to go ahead and pray.
Think of the difference between the Vietnam War and, say, World War II, that this monument was built in memory of their fallen comrades by the veterans themselves, as was the one in Washington, and not in their honor by a grateful nation. The veterans have erected these monuments in their rightful effort to find value and thereby pride in their service. To me, they have always been deserving of pride and honor, but not because it was a good war. I know that my son and all these others were brave and strong, devoted to their fellow Americans and to their duty as they saw it. No controversy among us over the war itself can minimize that. If a monument helps veterans to find that pride in themselves, let there be many monuments. However, the true meaning of these deaths can only be determined by how we, the survivors, regard the monuments and the value we find for ourselves in what they stand for. If we use them to glorify war rather than as a tribute to its warriors, we shall have failed. But if we can strive mightily to seek creative and not military solutions to overwhelming world problems, if we can acknowledge in humility the possibility of error in ourselves, and above all, if we can learn to love one another as we love them, their sacrifice for us will not have been in vain. A crucial line of the poem reads, whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this. Future generations will not judge us by our monuments, but rather by our actions. We are proud of our soldiers, all of them, but let us by our actions make them proud of us, that they may rest in peace.
Mrs. Ransom's son, one of the extras from his letter appears on this memorial wall, which is extras to letters, and I'd like to acknowledge Pete Mahoney, who's holding the Cambodian flag here, who played a major role in spearheading the construction of this memorial to commemorate those who served. Pete. Next, I'd like to introduce Rabbi A. Bruce Goldman. Rabbi Goldman is the president of the Center for Creative Jewish Living, and he's known as the People's Rabbi. I'd like to ask him up here. He'll do the Kaddish, the prayer of remembrance. Rabbi Goldman.
My dear brothers and sisters, my fellow Native Americans, Blue Gem Turquoise keeps the evil spirits away, especially with the government that we have. Every source we could possibly use to be utilized. It's nice to hear people laugh for a change. I come from a tradition that is so old that if we ever cease laughing, we'll cease being. I was invited to come here to pray for the dead. I don't personally spend a lot of time in praying for the dead. I have a character defect and I prefer to talk to the living and to pray with the living. The dead is part of the cycle of life. It's an act of continuity. The people who are here are the people who won the war. By human decency, by the reluctance to capitulate to policies which tell us that war is peace and that democracy is to pursued by a trail of bloodshed wherever our leaders would have us engage in international piracy throughout the world. That's utter nonsense, and the sound of the boat is an affirmation of that statement. I learned a lot by being a Jew and listening to many of my colleagues preach in their synagogues about the death of 6 million Jews. It's a fact. It's a tragic fact of history about which we have learned very little for the future. But I learned an awful lot about something else, and that is that the group that we forgot were the people who survived. The people with the continuing traumas. Some of the people who are here today, and many of those who unfortunately, since the last 17 years, have lost their lives through the frustration, the lack of acceptance and support by their fellow brothers and sisters. I personally never knew, although I was very, very active with Dan Berrigan and all the others in the war against Vietnam, I personally never knew one human being who went to the war in Vietnam who was killed. I have dozens of friends who have died of AIDS. I have dozens of friends who have died since the war in Vietnam because of the complications and the implications. Our society tells us that when people die, they've died for their country. After the USS Stark was hit in 1987 or 88, Ronald Reagan, standing in front of the casket surrounded by parents and loved ones and spouses of the dead 37 or 38 sailors, said, "These are the people who have died for their country. Real heroes." And that same weekend, with a flag at half-mast, this weekend, 5 years ago, addressing the students at Bowdoin College, my alma mater, which, by the way, this weekend is my 35th reunion. I prefer to be here with you than with them. It took me 30 years to figure out that their fathers were the ones that helped bring us the war in Vietnam. The real heroes are people who live for what they believe. Human nature, we are told, these are the kinds of activities that people are expected to be involved in. Every horrible crime, we say that's human nature. My commitment to life is to be one of many of us who are engaged in the war to change human nature. It's not enough to say our mothers were drunks and our fathers were thieves, and therefore, in 50 years of psychotherapy, I can cop out and blame Oliver Cromwell for the riots in LA, or my own lack of success for what my parents or my grandparents did. It's time to change human nature and be accountable for our own activities. You people, many of you, have paid the price for being accountable for your beliefs, and I hope you will continue for many long years. The world has to know that the real wars are the wars that are still to be fought. The fight to change human nature, to refuse to be part of any attempt to divide blacks from whites, Native Americans from those who came with Christopher Columbus, for Jews, for Christians, for Hindus, the largest religion of the world. We never hear about Hindus. And my brothers and sisters of Islam, and for the rest of you who may not have yet had a chance to make up your mind. The Kaddish is not a prayer for the dead. It's a prayer which in effect says, in translation, human beings screw up. They experience terrible tragedies and they commit terrible tragedies. And we're not going to blame the creator and the giver of the loan of years of life for those acts of horror. We'll continue to affirm and cherish the name of our creator, our supporter, and our nurturer. There's another kind of Trinity that you never hear about. You hear about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's time we began to affirm the Creator, the Nurturer, and the Perpetuator. On all of life's occasions, it's important to say these words. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehachionu v'kiyamonu v'higionu lazman hazeh. Blessed art thou, source of life, creator of humanity, who has been generous enough to give us life, to sustain us, and to reach this day. And before I recite the traditional Kaddish, I know there are a lot of people who believe that the Vietnam syndrome is what kept our country in check from further plundering around the world. There is an additional ingredient now which makes our attention on what our leaders do and say and our neighbors, forcing us to become more alert than ever. The demise of the Soviet Union, which has kept this country in check for decades, is no longer keeping this country in check. They have their hands out. They have their hands out, and we need to feed them, and we really do. So, those who know it, you can say it with me. This is not a blessing or a prayer in Hebrew, it's in Aramaic. And the reason it was in Aramaic is because Hebrew was Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue. It was important for everybody to know the vernacular. Vernacular was what Jesus spoke. It was Aramaic. So if it sounds a little strange to you, that's all right. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei rabbah v'yalma divrach yerutei v'yamlik malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedachol beit Yisrael b'galav izman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mavarach le'olam l'me'el maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitada v'yitalal shvei d'kucha b'rifu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Dushbechata v'nechemata damiran b'yoma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlom harabba min shamaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. And for our dear departed in all wars, in particular in the war in Vietnam, and for those who, for the neglect of support, frustration, depression, guilt, horror, are no longer with us since those days. El malay rachamim shochem bram romim hapsei menucha nakona tachat kanshrei ashkina. Source of life, full of compassion, grant perfect rest unto the souls of our brothers and sisters, those about whom we know and those about whom we are yet to know, who have but physically departed from this world. Creator of compassion, giver of life, bring them into thy presence. Let their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be thou their possession, and may their repose be shalom, 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 everlasting peace. And we ask that all those who mourn here and throughout the world of all generations be comforted. May God grant peace from on high, from below, from each side. And in the name of the divine spirit, that is not the divine in Boca Raton, nor in Jerusalem, nor Mecca, nor Rome, but the divine that lives in each and every one of us. L'chaim, 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 to life. God bless.
In 1988, I had the opportunity to return to Vietnam as part of a veterans delegation. And even though I had worked for many years against the war and for people's rights and for peace, and to come to terms with that war, it was still very hard for me to go back to the scene of the crime, so to speak, and to meet with those who I had fought against. It was a very moving experience for me. It was important for me in terms of coming to terms with that war. Then in 1990, we had the opportunity to be part of an effort where a Vietnamese combat veteran came to the United States. He had served, his name is Nguyen Na Kung, and he served with the People's Army of Vietnam, what we call the North Vietnamese, but the People's Army of Vietnam, 320th Division, from 1969 to 1975 in the Quang Tri province in central Vietnam. He came here on Veterans Day 1990 and spoke at this very same place as part of our efforts to promote reconciliation and for veterans to come to terms and reach out and find what we have in common and learn from the past. And recently we had another delegation went to Vietnam, and they met Hung in Hanoi, where he teaches English, and they told him about this event. And for other business that he's working on in the United States, and he asked to come to this event in New York, and we arranged it so he could be up here. His brother is one of, we hear a lot about the VOWs and the MIAs and this and that. Hung's brother is one of the over 200,000 Vietnamese MIAs still missing in their own country, and he's played an important part in a number of people's lives in terms of coming to terms with that war and to reaching out to those who are former enemies. I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Nguyen Na Kung.
Good morning, brother and sister. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very honored to be here with the Vietnam veteran against the war. And I would like to express my gratitude to your effort during the war to stop the killing and the war in Vietnam. Vietnam, after the war, has been trying their best to rebuild the country and make it a happy place for everybody to live in. This effort has been hampered by the trade embargo and an economic and political war by this government. I've been coming a long way to this country to speak to the veterans in this country that the veterans in Vietnam would like to reach out their hands for friendship and reconciliation with American veterans and American people. I have with me here a present from Vietnamese veterans to Vietnam veterans against the war in honor of their efforts to stop the war in Vietnam. And I would like to present it to you. I asked the artist to do this wonderful picture for me. For this particular occasion, I call it Let There Be No More War. And I once more would like to take this opportunity to speak to the so many friends here that Vietnam is not a war. It's a country where the people there are trying their best to reintegrate into the world community and to build a happy place for everybody to live in. And I would like to invite as many veterans and American people to come back to Vietnam and see our beautiful country in peacetime. And thank you very much.
Brother Hung will be Romero over there, and it made me think of a tradition in Central America. Many people here have been interested and active in what's been going on in Central America the last decade and a half or so. When we say the word present, there's a certain connotation. In Spanish, when people say presente, they're talking about being with people, to put yourself forward, to say actively that we're here. When people in Central America remember folks, they dedicate themselves to their memory, but they also carry part of them with them in life, as well as represent them in life. So I would ask you today, right now, to share just 3 short presentes with me. Just kind of respond to 3 things. For our brothers and sisters that are no longer with us, presente. Presente. For the people in the world who can no longer be with us, presente. Presente. For our children and their future and the part we'll have in it, presente. Gracias.
Thank you. Tom is the Western Regional Coordinator for VVAW from Texas. We thought that Father Daniel Berrigan was one of our real MIAs, but apparently he just arrived. So I'd like, without any further ado, to introduce Reverend Berrigan, who's played a major role in opposing the Vietnam War. During that war, he helped destroy draft files to prevent young men from being fed into the meat grinder and did time for that, and has put his life on the line where it mattered. I'd like to introduce Daniel Berrigan.
Well, thank you, and I say thanks in the name of my brother also. I wanted this morning to commemorate with you the Catonsville 9 who burned draft files in 1968 and were tried and convicted and given federal scholarships. And I want to quote from the statement that I made during our trial. Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children, the angering of the orderlies in the front parlor of the charnel house. We could not, so help us God, do otherwise, for we are sick at heart. Our hearts give us no rest for thinking of the land of burning children. Small consolation that a child is born to make trouble and to die for it, the first Jew and not the last to be subject of a definitive solution. So we stretch out our hands to our brothers and sisters throughout the world. All of us who act against the law turn to the poor, to the Vietnamese, to the victims, to the soldiers who kill and die for the wrong reasons, for no reason at all, because they were so ordered by the authorities of that public order, which is in effect a massive institutionalized disorder. We say killing is disorder. Life and gentleness and community and unselfishness is the only order we recognize. For the sake of that order, we risk our liberty and our good name. The past is silent when good men and women may be silent, when obedience can segregate people from public risk, when the poor can die without defense. How many indeed must die before our voices are heard? How many be tortured, dislocated, starved, maddened, and disappeared? How long must the world's resources be raped in the service of legalized murder? At what point will you say no to this war? We have chosen to say with the gift of our liberty and, if necessary, our lives, the violence stops here, the death stops here, The suppression of the truth stops here. The war stops here.
We're going to now place the placards commemorating those who've died from all countries in war. We mourn the dead. We're committed to fight for the living and to make the next generation have a better world. Can we start on the end? Honduras, 887. Panama, 2015. Grenada, 91. Thailand, we don't know. Guatemala, 145,000. Nicaragua, 29,117. Persian Gulf, 253,558 and climbing. Iran, unknown. Lebanon, 537 Americans.
Keep going. Come on, keep going.
Cambodia, 200,000. Vietnam, 2 million. El Salvador, 75,000. Laos, 100,000. I can't see it.
Libya. This one, Libya.
Libya, 78. Palestine, many thousands. United States and Indochina, 60,300. Bugler? Bugler? Honor the dead and fight for the living. Vietnam never again. Please follow the Vietnam Veterans Against the War flag and American flag in a procession to Battery Park. Thank you very much.
Well, not that long, but maybe 10.
No.
Spin them around. Let me get the three of you to sit. Okay.
Somebody better stop the chorus.
1, 2, 3, 4, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4.
It's okay.
Yeah, I got big strike.
International Party.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I got out last night.
Yeah, now we got a delegation from New York. I did.
Africa, the list goes on. It's a U.S. waged world war. You're a time bomb that's ticking. Oh, you're a death flag that's waving. Oh, you're a time bomb that's ticking. Oh, can't you hear the people? Can't you hear the young ones? Can't you hear the nations crying? They said, get out, get out. You're really ruining the view. Get out, the view. You're really ruining the view. Get out.
How are you?
And shame building crates stamped USA, where their bodies will finally lay. I ain't no Muslim, but to take a stand against the wicked tide and make it known. Let my people, will we finally see the poets and the bankers and the homeless and the statesmen? Yeah, and we don't need no holy, always time, always time, all the people. Thank you.
War in Vietnam. For 25 years, we've fought for peace. And the one thing is the stuff that brought us together, the policies of the U.S. government, haven't changed in that last 25 years. There's only one reason for us to be here today, and that's to realize that we've got another 5, 10, and my God, maybe 25 years of struggling for peace in this country. If we were just coming together for some kind of anniversary like a lot of other vets groups, tell war stories either about peace or about war, then we could have stayed in the bars. And one of the reasons we came into the streets instead to have a demonstration was to get ourselves to rededicate ourselves to that question of fighting for peace. One of the things that gets me incredibly mad when I watch shows about Vietnam is them talking about the peace movement spitting on Vietnam vets when we came home. I wasn't spit on by the peace movement when I came home. The Republicans in the 72 convention spit on us. The American Legion and the VFW, who thought our hair was too long, of course, we were able to grow hair sometimes, are the ones that didn't accept us. But in fact, it was the peace movement that took us into their hearts wholeheartedly. We didn't start the peace movement. We were welcomed by them. And if it wasn't for people like Abe Weisberg and Dave Dillinger, there would be a lot more names on the wall, because it was their dedication, their welcoming, their heartfelt comradeship that helped us get over the pains of our service in Indochina. Unfortunately, there really is a need for VVAW to continue to exist. A year ago, the Gulf War ended, and we saw across the United States flags and yellow ribbons, Patriot missiles. They couldn't even find enough Patriot missiles. They were making them out of paper mache as they were claiming this great victory with no civilian casualties and with a great techno war. And 1 year later, we know the truth. 250,000 dead, Patriot missiles that caused more damage by their firing than if they'd have left them on the ground, and the exact same policies towards the GIs that served in that war. In Chicago, we have a Gulf vet who just joined the local chapter, and his stories on the front of the Gulf are no different than Vietnam. He was in a frontline unit. They wouldn't allow any of the cameramen or the news media to be in the front lines. They put all of them in the second echelon. And this guy had to fight. He had to watch his friends die, both from friendly fire and from Iraqi. And then they had to bury the dead Iraqis in mass graves so that when the news media came through, there would be no bodies of the war to be on the evening news. Right now, that brother has got his delayed stress disability, just like we do. He's 21 years old, and unfortunately, the only thing I can offer him is probably another war in another few years. But do I feel bad about it? Well, yes. On the other hand, I feel extremely good because I've got brothers and sisters like those in VVAW and in the peace movement. Somebody said VVAW is a lot more than an organization. It's an extended family. And that's what we want this anniversary to be, a celebration of our extended family for social change in the United States.
Well, this next person that you're going to hear from, you all know.
It's really, really nice to be here. I came today primarily to celebrate this organization and to say thank you and to share in the sense of camaraderie and good feelings in being with, quite frankly, a whole bunch of vets that over the last few years I haven't had that many occasions to feel the way I feel right now sitting with a bunch of vets. This is a group of vets I'm comfortable with. Yeah, really, welcome home. I do think that it's important that we take a minute and go back and think about what VVAW has meant for us. And it was VVAW that reached out and gave expression to what I was feeling. It was VVAW that gave the voice that I didn't have and that veterans in this country didn't have. It was VVAW that reached out to me in that hospital and educated me that what I had gone through was not an individual experience. But VVAW made me understand by explaining that it was our collective experience in that war. And I thank VVAW for that education, for the outreach, for the networking. I also thank VVAW for really the first assistance that they provided me, really, as a veteran. You know, it was this organization that started the idea of rap groups and peer support and having veterans talk to each other to help try and understand what we had gone through. Up at the VA hospital in the Bronx, they had me going to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist was one of these classic doctors with a white coat that wanted to know how I related to my mother. He was thinking that maybe the source of my anger had something to do with some Freudian problem because of my relationship with my mother. It was VVAW that through the peer support rap group concept got me and an awful lot of veterans to get beyond where we were in our anger and disillusionment upon our return home. And for that I thank this organization. It was through VVAW that we really had a tremendous learning experience. It was one that was born in an extraordinary way, for me at least, with the organizations that I've been experienced with over the years, in that when we'd get together for a rally, nobody had to instruct the veterans as to what to say. Nobody had to set an agenda for what the organization was about. We all knew what it was about. Nobody had to give us lines. You could get together 1,000, 2,000 veterans, and we understood why we were coming together. It was legitimate, it was real, and it was born out of our personal experience. The war was wrong. We knew that. There was a fundamental problem with America. We sensed it, but we didn't really have an understanding. It was through the VVAW experience that we came to learn about our culture and how it is fundamentally a racist society, how it is fundamentally a militaristic culture, We came to learn about our economy as a war-based economy. And we came to learn about our government and about the sense of democracy and freedom that we had grown up being taught, having been taken over by the state. You know, a real learning experience for what we would encounter in the rest of our lives was what the government tried to do to this organization in breaking it up, on how the government sent infiltrators into this organization to be provocateurs, to try and lead us into the kinds of violence that would bring the power of the state down on us. They put infiltrators into this organization to try and discredit it. They set up drug busts. They set up this organization. They gave us an early lesson in what domestic spying is all about. But you know what? I find myself thinking a little wistfully of what I now look at as good old days. Because the buffoonery of Nixon, Mitchell, and all of those obvious clowns was nowhere near as damaging or as threatening as what you now have in this country as a national security police apparatus that is very cold, very calculating, much less obvious, and much, much more effective. Look around this country today, people, and just think about it. Is it the natural, normal state of affairs that we really don't have any opposition elements in this country that are worth anything? Do you think that's the normal state of affairs in a democratic society, that there is really no effective opposition to the administration in this country? That doesn't happen by coincidence. That's the result of a direct policy. When you look back at particularly the outrageousness of the Reagan and the Bush years and realize what they've gotten away with without any effective mass opposition in this country, you realize we have effectively lost our liberty. We have effectively lost a democratic society. America is a controlled state. And anybody with any common sense needs only look around, see what's happened over these last years, and the lack of a public mass response to it, and you'll have to agree. We've got some very troubled times in this country. And yes, the need for us, that 25 years ago personally bore witness to what can happen when this country goes totally off the path. We have got to stay true to our experience and 25 years of learning the hard lessons of what this country, in fact, is all about, and continue for succeeding generations what we did for ourselves, which is to reach out to each other, which is to network with each other, and most importantly, to educate, and to educate each other and those that succeed about what we've gone through, what we've learned, and what's going on in America today. There's no substitute. That's the game, and that's what we have to do. I'm going to make one last brief comment, and then I'm out of here. I'm going to come down there. We were born together, initially, by a war that was wrong. The American people overwhelmingly came to understand that the war in Vietnam was wrong. And the verdict was given by the American people that this war was not only a mistake, but it was more than a mistake. It was immoral. It was absolutely, unequivocally wrong. That is the overwhelming majority opinion within the American public. However, the American public doesn't understand that what it adjudicated over 20 years ago to have been immoral and wrong still continues today. The war never ended. We overwhelmingly recognize it as having been immoral and wrong, but yet it continues. The United States has maintained an absolutely crippling economic embargo against Vietnam. Its efforts to isolate and punish Vietnam have been unrelenting. You have a nation that today is 69 million people. Fully half of that population wasn't even alive when we had our war with Vietnam, and yet they are the victims of our continuing aggression and hostility. The United States economic embargo has blocked all of the developmental assistance that Vietnam, like any devastated, war-torn, underdeveloped third world country, needs. If you're going to have the transportation system, the communication system, the electricity and the power systems, that you can then build a society up, you need the help of the multilateral institutions. You need to get the support for that infrastructure development from the Asia Development Bank, the IMF, the World Bank. The United States unilaterally has vetoed Vietnam receiving any of that assistance. Today, Ho Chi Minh City doesn't have electricity 4 days out of the week during the dry season. You cannot rebuild a country if you don't have electricity. You can't rebuild a country without the transportation system. The United States is singularly responsible. The American people don't even realize it, that the war never ended. We said years ago to Vietnam, if you get out of Cambodia, we will normalize relations and lift the embargo. I will say to you, as one who has gone back to Cambodia many times over the last years, thank God Vietnam went into Cambodia and drove the Khmer Rouge out. The ultimate irony of ironies is that we may wind up yet in the world community asking Vietnam to go back into Cambodia if the UN peace process that we're refusing to properly fund collapses and the Khmer Rouge come back. But we said to Vietnam, get out of Cambodia and we'll normalize relations. Vietnam got out of Cambodia. And we said, no, sorry, that's not good enough. Now you've got to make sure that the warring factions come to a peace agreement. Then we'll normalize relations. Well, Vietnam put its worth in, and the warring factions signed a peace accord last year. And we said, oh, sorry, that ain't good enough. Now you've got to account for our missing in action from the war. We keep changing the goalposts. The only thing we're consistent is our total lack of integrity and honesty and decency in dealing with the peoples of Vietnam. We're getting close, I think at last, to the finish line. You have to understand that this last fiction of the prisoner of war issue is nothing but that, a pure and absolute fiction. It is a propaganda piece that was initiated all the way back as a reason to continue the war under Nixon, and it's continued today. I will say that I do have a lot of confidence in one of our brothers, John Kerry, who's heading that Senate committee, that I think is doing an incredibly good job in finally putting this issue to rest. But let's remember, it ain't over. The war with Vietnam hasn't ended. It's what brought us together, and we should stay reunited and re-energized in our commitment to bring that final goal of reconciliation, which I would argue includes restitution, to the people of Vietnam about. Let's be in the forefront. Thanks.
What a guy, what a guy. You know, Bobby said something earlier in the beginning of his speech. He said, let's talk about what VVAW means. Well, I'm from the Midwest, and there were some right-wing vets groups in the early 70s that didn't like us very much. They gave us a nickname. They thought we would be insulted. But actually, we accepted it as sort of a sub-label for our Milwaukee chapter, and it was Vietnam vegetable. Chant you hear is no justice, no peace. Now that's a concept that's been around for a very long time, and one of the first examples of no justice, no peace was the Democratic Convention in Chicago. And as was mentioned earlier, part of the foundation for the anti-war veterans movement in this country, justice. And our next speaker is one of the rocks, one of our foundations that have helped us persevere over the years and help us continue to commit to real justice in the world. Dave Dellinger.
If any of you ever heard me speak before, you know that it's my custom to criticize the person who introduces me. How the hell can I do that now? Because usually the reason is, they say, peace activist Dave Dellinger. I say, no, you got it wrong. There's no peace without justice. I'd rather be called a justice activist, not a peace activist. But that's typical of the spirit here today. Now, you know, as I look back, we all have memories, but mostly I want to talk about the present, because the present, the here and now, is what counts. But my memory from the early anti-Vietnam War days was that whenever you saw a veteran, you were in trouble. Because every time we went out, you know, people would have signs saying, bomb Hanoi. They would throw tomatoes, eggs, sometimes rocks, who knows what. But then it began to change. And it changed when VVAW, well, even before that, when people like the ones who formed it came back and began to tell the truth and have the kind of courage under pressure that inspired us all. Now, one of the problems about the past is that people think, you know, the 60s was easy. Everybody rolled out of bed and they went, you know, and all that marvelous thing was happening. And for a while, I used to go to high schools and people would say, oh, I was born in the wrong generation. I should have been born in the 60s. But you know, it's never easy, and it's not easy right now. I like to quote Dickens, you know, the best of times and the worst of times. And we've heard a little bit today about how bad the times are institutionally, governmentally. But I'm here to say that I think our movement, the movement that has been speaking from this and from the other meeting, is stronger, deeper, better today than at any other time. They always try to make us think the days of social revolt are over. All you have to do is to look at the 70s. It was clear there is no more social revolt. Oh no? What about the re-energizing of the women's movement that was going on? And you know, just to summarize, today, two things. First of all, I believe there are more people who know in their hearts that this system is immoral and unjust and has to go than at any time of my life, including the depression of the 30s when I cut my own political teeth. But secondly, one has to look at, you know, just consider the women's movement, the lesbian and gay men's movement, the liberation theology movement, the environmental movement. In the old days, we had two issues that had center stage. And so on those issues, I'm going to oversimplify it, but on those issues, that's where all the attention was, at least in the press, even though we tried to make it broader. Now there are 57 different issues like Heinz varieties of ketchup or whatever it is they sell. 57 different varieties of issues. So you don't have everybody going to the same city on the same weekend to shout the same slogan, and therefore it's easy to say the days of social revolt are over. They're not over. Now, in conclusion, Rabbi Goldman spoke about human nature. I loved what he said this morning. I don't read many books on sociology, but I was asked to write an introduction to one, so I had to read it. Now I can't even remember the title to tell you. But inside it, I remember the guy, the author, David Bouchier, Englishman. And he said, people seem to be by nature what they think they have to be in order to survive in a particular society. So today we have people living with contradictory impulses inside them.